I'd like to open the show with a message for the old crone who left me a message on my work telephone last night. I got in this morning and had a chance to take a listen to it. First of all, she's got to clean the wax out of her ears because she doesn't know, apparently, what she's listening to. I get these calls every now and then, and they're usually from people who are on the periphery of society as it is. She's a very unhappy woman, perhaps, of course, postmenopausal now, and that may be the reason why. I walked in this morning and I saw the light flashing on the telephone at my desk, so I sat down and it was one message. And I could hear this angry, trembling voice. Bertha, Gertrude, whatever your name is, I got a chance to listen to it. She was so angry, though, that she actually got cut off. She talked for so long, so I didn't get all of the message. But she's accusing me of saying something on the air yesterday, which I did not. And in my own defense, sometimes, I can't do this on every segment of the program, but sometimes I actually have YouTube videos that I culled from the show. And as it turns out, the subject that she is talking about was yesterday one of those videos that I saved. And I edited the video, only editing the commercials out because YouTube says we're not supposed to air those over the YouTube platform. So you get the entire segment other than the commercials. She's not complaining about the commercials. Let me make that clear. 8 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. So this video was uploaded to YouTube yesterday about 11 o'clock and then, in the morning, 11 o'clock. And then I also posted it as part of a blog at our website, newsradio1310.com. So if anybody would like to verify, you can see it. And I'm writing about sex crimes involving Muslims, not just in Twin Falls, but all over the world. And that was what the segment was dealing with. We opened it up talking about what happened in Germany, in places like Cologne, in places like Hamburg, and then what's happening in Massachusetts and in New Brunswick in Canada, and with what happened here in Twin Falls. And at some point in the conversation, I had a caller, and I told the caller that I had an email the other day, and it came to my work email address, bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com, and a fellow was sending this along, and he was curious about it. It was from a website that said that the families who had been told to get out of Fawnbrook Apartments had not yet done that. Well, I said in my conversation on the telephone over the air with this caller yesterday that I couldn't verify that website. In other words, I questioned the trustworthiness of it. And yet this old crone who called and left a message on my office telephone, the old crone says that I'm making the claim that the people are still there and that they aren't, and that I'm a fool, and that if I would just call and verify at the Fawnbrook Apartments, I would get it straight. But that's not what I was doing. I was actually questioning the veracity of the website which made that claim. So therefore, Gertrude, before you picked up the telephone and called, you may have taken the cotton out of your ears, and you might have been able to hear this. Perhaps you should give a telephone call to Dr. Christine Pickup, because apparently you need a hearing analysis. So I have these situations go on. And then the caller also said, well, it took local police 2.5 hours to get to Fawnbrook to investigate. And I also said, I don't think so. I'm not sure of that. I wouldn't go there because I've talked to, personally, privately, one of the people involved in the investigation who went there that day. And it was not 2.5 hours. I know these things have gained their own legs and they're walking around the community, and if it benefits the other side to make all of these claims. But again, here you go. You've got everybody stacking the deck no matter what side they are so they can make their argument, which is a terrible, terrible way to approach this, because then if you can't be trusted, they won't trust you the next time out. And that's for my friends on the right side of this argument as well. We've got to be clear, and we've got to be on top of these things, and we can't keep repeating things that might not be true. And so the caller wanted to vent about all of this, and so I hope she goes to the website and takes a listen to the YouTube video that is posted there, because it will straighten her out. I've been dealing with this for years on the radio. People obviously, unlike a newspaper, can't go back and reread what they just read, and you don't have little rewind gears that allow you to turn it back. But occasionally, I'm saved by the YouTube video. I used to have a guy when I was working in Delaware. He was an angry local homosexual. He died of a heart attack because he was always so angry. I guess that's because mom and dad never accepted him. But he would call the show, and he would say, "You just said," and I would point out I hadn't, and he would scream, "Yes, you did." Or a caller to my show would say something, and then 5 minutes later, the same guy would call up and say, "You just said," and I would say, "No, that was caller Joe." "No, it was you, it was you." And it was obvious. And again, I used to actually save some of the programs there too. The problem is, while it was in real time recording, you can't go back and say, well, let's listen to it all over again. Or you can't search through 20 minutes of a tape while you're on the air trying to find exactly what you were talking about that you're being accused of doing. But frankly, I understand that people can't hear everything you say. While they're driving down the road, there may be a fly in the car and they're distracted, or the telephone rings while they're listening to the radio in the office or home. But this is why I end up getting these calls, and frankly, I'm sick to death of it. We have a caller with us right now. You're on the air. You're up next on KLIX.
Yes, Bill. I'm a very opinionated person, and I try to make sure I know what I'm talking about, but not always do I know everything. And one of the things about it is my opinion is my opinion. I am a guest on your show, and to misconstrue something I said as something you said is BS. And so I take full responsibility for what I say. Hopefully it's never too terrible. When it comes to the 2.5 hour thing, I heard it. I read it in the paper. And then I heard it online at a website that I can't remember the name of it, but Jolene Payne Grandma Joe is the one that had confirmed to me the 2.5 hours. Now, whether or not we can trust Grandma Joe or not, I don't know. But I'm the one who had repeated it yesterday. And so, again, my opinion is mine. And I'm a guest on your program, and I appreciate the opportunity.
I was referring to a second caller who brought up the 2.5 hours, and it's all over on the internet. And some people may well believe who are involved in the center of all of this because emotions were so high, it may have seemed like 2.5 hours. But I don't have the report sitting in front of me. And I do know from one of the investigators it wasn't that long before they started arriving on the scene.
Right, but when Chief Kingsbury says it was a timely matter, or whatever he said, they responded in a timely fashion. That doesn't tell me how long it took.
Sure.
Either. And so, again, this isn't about whether or not I'm right or anybody else is wrong. This is about the safety of my community. Again, I have children, 9 granddaughters, and I'm going to tell you, if I have a granddaughter that age, and if she had been sexually assaulted, whatever you want to term that as, whether or not you want to call it rape or not, I would be so beside myself, I wouldn't know what to do. But you see, when we don't care about our fellow man because it didn't happen to us, that's an irresponsible citizen of America, and I don't want to be that.
Amen. Hey, thank you much for the call, sir. Good hearing from you. Telephone number 736-0300. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Whether it was 2 hours and 28 minutes or 28 minutes, they still did the investigation. So that part of it, I think we can put aside for now. That's done. They did the investigation. Arrests were made, and that's a subject for, I think, another discussion. But I will say this. I think part of the reason this woman was so angry when she called yesterday and left me this message on the phone, number one, is a lot of your liberal friends out there, they hear things or they hear them secondhand. They don't even listen to the show. Someone else says, well, he said this today. It's like that where you stand at one. So we used to do the exercise in class where we would have a line and somebody would be told something and you'd whisper it to the person next to you. And by the time it got to the other end, it's a completely different story. So I get a lot of that. Well, I heard you said this. First of all, they call up the phone and they open fire and shoot you. Then they ask questions later. This is how this generally works. Well, I heard. Well, if you didn't hear it, then shut up. All right? You got to start listening to the program. That's the best way you're going to find out, by listening to the program every day for the entire 2 hours from 8 until 10 o'clock in the morning. It'll help you greatly. You won't have to come across then as a fool saying, well, I had heard. I had a call, it was last winter from a federal agency right after the shooting of Lavoy Finicum, and they called and they claimed, telling my bosses that I was encouraging people to go demonstrate outside their offices. Luckily, again, there was a YouTube video, and I had said no such thing. My guess is they hadn't heard it. but they started putting pieces together because, well, my third cousin, twice removed, called from Alabama and said he said it. And he heard it from somebody he knew in Wyoming who heard it from a friend who heard it out in Buell. And so there you go, all over again. Although I suspect in that case it was just the bureaucrats. They were angry and figured, well, we don't like that guy, what he's talking about. Maybe we can silence him. Because, again, we are your public servants, so you work for us. But the other part of this, and I think the angry woman who left me the message yesterday, among the liberals who have supported this program in this community, this refugee resettlement program, they have, as you know, what you'd call a feeling of moral superiority over the rest of us. Because if you're not supporting the program, then they call you a racist or a bigot or small-minded. So they've walked around with their chest puffed out, telling everybody how good they are for the last few years while they support this program. And then they say, we aren't that kind of people, as if they speak for everybody. And of course, they don't. They speak for their faction in the community, which is a fraction of the community. And so they strut around and they make their pronunciations. They don't live near any of the people who might cause the problems. And they have made it clear that they know best and that the rest of us should just keep our mouths shut because we're getting in the way of their do-gooderism. And when we warned them and said, well, we're going to end up with these things happening, they said, aha, again, you racist bigot, you think that that's what these people are all about. And when it finally did happen, then all of a sudden, what do they say, that denial is one of the stages of recovery? They're in denial right now because it did happen, and worse will happen, and more will happen. Because we're seeing it happen in Europe, and we're seeing it happen in other parts of the country, and we're seeing it happen all over North America and Canada, where these people are being resettled in ever larger numbers. So the fact of the matter is, they're right now, their worldview and their claims to their moral superiority and that they know better, there is evidence out there which is clearly showing that they are not the people they thought they were when it comes to being the intelligentsia or the elite or all of the brains in this community. And they are right now angry about that, and they will lash out at anyone who points out their foolishness because they claim we were the dumb dummies. And now they've got to mop up the mess that they created. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. I have a break coming up, but more of your telephone. There we go. I'll get that. It'll come out sooner or later. It's all these allergies in the air affecting my voice today. A lot of people are telling me they're suffering through the same thing this week. We've got more coming up. Also, I believe Ken Menzel will be joining us about 8:30 this morning from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. And also, we've got an hour or so we're going to spend with Kelton Hatch from Idaho Fish and Game just after 9 o'clock news this morning. That's on the way on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. The show is Top Story with Bill Colley, and it's 62. Do want to point out, I mentioned earlier Dr. Christine Pickup, and for those people out there who do have trouble hearing, those of us who've walked around for years with headphones on, we're probably in that group now too as well. We want to remind you she is the only locally owned independent hearing healthcare practice in southern Idaho. And if you're like most people, you think that your hearing is something that happens in your ears, but in fact it's what's between the ears that counts. The brain is where sound becomes the details, and your brain has to work harder to make that happen when you're having hearing trouble. When the sound signals from your ears are compromised, your brain has to work even harder to fill in the gaps, and the extra effort can take its toll. Don't let your brain down. Take care of your hearing with the help of Mount Harrison Audiology. The office number, 312-0957. She's also available online at mountharrisonaudiology.com. Right now, it's almost 25 minutes after 8 o'clock. It's 63. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. As I mentioned, Ken Menzel will be joining us in just a few minutes from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department. He recruited one of my coworkers the other day. I should point that out, and deputized him. My coworker is still alive today and very grateful about that. We'll talk a little bit about some other issues, though, as we move along a little later in the program. Also, Kelton Hatch is scheduled to join us just after the 9 o'clock news this morning. And we got a lot of updates to talk about. He's got, of course, to talk still about remaining free fishing days and some of the other programs, some details on elk hunting, but a couple of stories on the web today. It looks like there may be a grizzly bear hunt on the way. Possibly. I'll just say possibly, because somebody out there just said, Bill said it. I've got to correct him. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
William.
Yes.
It's Dr. Michael calling from the Delaware Beach.
Oh my goodness! Long time no
Your
see.
old, your old stomping ground. I just wanted to call and ask you off topic what you thought of Ruth Buzzy Ginsburg violating the Canon 5 of judicial conduct.
You mean Ruth
I wanted,
Baader-Meinhof?
yes.
she, I've got to tell you that even the New York Times took a side against her, and it said, I think, in an editorial, that if we end up with another election as close as 2000, that she's going to be called to take part in that, and she's already given us her bias. So she would then have to recuse herself. We would only have 7 justices because we still have a vacancy. We would only have 7 justices making that decision if it was that close to call come next year.
I hope people take her up on her offer to move to New Zealand. So but I wanted to call in and tell you how much we miss you here. I do listen to the show every day, and you're terrific.
Hey, I got to tell you a quick story. Because I was thinking of you the other day. My caller helped design the set. Can I say that now?
Sure.
For Mark Levin's TV show. And you're the guy who came up with the idea of putting Reagan's desk on the set. The other day we had a telephone call, and somebody was telling us that they had been trying to listen to Mark Levin on the air, and for some reason they couldn't hear him. And of course, we don't carry his show, and that may have been the reason why they didn't hear it. But you actually have met the man, right?
I met him one time. Yes.
Quite impressive, isn't he?
He's a very impressive, just from an intellectual standpoint, just an engaging guy, and can talk about a multitude of things. And just I find him to be brilliant. But it's to me, if they wanted to go do that, it would be Levin TV online. But I always say that the people that listen to people like yourself and Levin and Rush and everybody else get different takes. And no matter where you are in the country, I think the conservative mindset is always consistent. So it's good to know that you're out there locally, but we do miss you here.
Well, hey, quickly too, while you're with us, we got about 2 minutes before the break. So as long as you're on the line, I want to point out that both your dad and your uncle were police officers in Philadelphia, which is not an easy place to work. And they both knew Frank Rizzo really well, as did you, when he was the chief of police in that city. The events of the last week, I'm sure, have been very unsettling to a lot of people. I was reading this morning that there's a gut feeling among law enforcers across the country that we haven't even scratched the surface on the worst of it yet. How do they feel about it?
I talk to my dad every day. He's 72 and he's retired here, and 30 years on the Philadelphia police force. And I think the one thing he always tells me is that he was so glad he retired in 1988 because that's when it started to change. He's never seen anything like this. And just as something as simple as at the ESPYs last night, LeBron James, Carmelo Anthony, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Paul got up and mentioned, the Black Lives Matter, but didn't mention anything about the 5 cops that were assassinated. It just tells you where we are, and it's tragic. I always emphasize that these incidents are always seen. They were in the commission of committing a crime. It's not like people were walking down the street innocently. And when there's no excuse for some behavior, but I can't believe what I'm seeing before my eyes, and neither can my father.
Yeah, and Carmelo Anthony, if I recall, was a guy. He was a hoodlum at one time, and he made a video with some drug dealers back in Baltimore, and the NBA nearly had to give him the boot for it. Not really a very trustworthy fellow.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And to see that last night on a big stage is I think ridiculous, and I think that's why ESPN's ratings are going down.
Well, hey, Doctor, we'll talk to you sometime soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Bill.
Hey, take care, sir. 8:30. Speaking of law enforcers, Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department is going to be joining us in about 3 minutes. Right now, we're at 8:30. It's 63. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com.